April 6, 1943, 8:47 a.m., 18,000 feet above the Mediterranean Sea. Flight Lieutenant James McClachlin checks his fuel gauge. 32 minutes remaining. He scans the horizon through the Spitfire's canopy. Empty sky, blue water. The limestone cliffs of Malta glow, white below. Then the radio crackles. 22 contacts. High altitude. Bearing north-northwest. Messerschmitt, BF-109s. The newest G model, variants with bulged cowlings and 20mm cannons. Fast, lethal. Hunting. McClachlin is alone. No wingman. No backup. No reinforcements scrambling from the cratered airfields below. The standing orders are explicit. Avoid engagement. The Spitfire Mark V he's flying is obsolete. A 1941 design considered outdated by 1943 standards. Single-stage supercharger. Lower ceiling. Less speed at altitude. The Air Ministry calls it an interim fighter. The pilots call it what they have left. McClachlin banks left, the sun behind him. His eyes track the dark specks materializing against the blue. 10 fighters, 15, 20, 22. They're heading straight for Malta. Straight for the airfields where dozens of Spitfires sit parked. Vulnerable, irreplaceable. One strafing run could destroy a week's worth of aircraft. Could cripple the island's air defense. Could hand the Mediterranean back to the Axis. McClachlin does the math. 22 German fighters versus one obsolete British fighter. The odds are suicide, but there's one detail the Germans don't know. One advantage that doesn't appear in any manual or specification sheet. McClachlin lost his left arm 2 years ago. A cannon shell over France. Amputation below the elbow. The Air Ministry grounded him. Said fighter pilots need both hands. He proved them wrong. He taught himself to fly with one arm. Designed a custom harness. Practiced until the movements became automatic. Until the prosthetic became an extension of his will. They told him the Spitfire Mark V was obsolete. They told him a one-armed pilot couldn't fight. They told him to stay grounded. In exactly 90 seconds, he's going to prove that logic doesn't care what the manual says. That sometimes the outdated weapon in the right hands beats the advanced weapon in uncertain ones. What you're about to witness is 17 minutes of combat that should have been impossible. One pilot, one arm, one obsolete fighter. Against odds no doctrine would ever accept. James McClachlin was born in India in 1919, learned to fly in 1938, joined the Royal Air Force because flying made sense to him, the physics of lift and thrust, the mathematics of energy and altitude, the pure logic of staying alive at 300 miles per hour. He wasn't boisterous, didn't fill the mess hall with stories. He was precise, methodical, the kind of pilot who double-checked his harness and counted his ammunition before every flight, who memorized the quirks of each aircraft, who treated the Spitfire not as a weapon but as a system requiring constant calibration. Combat mission over France. A German cannon shell tore through his cockpit. Shattered bone, severed nerves, blood everywhere. McClachlin kept the aircraft steady, crossed the channel, landed with one hand on the stick. The surgeons amputated below the elbow. The Air Ministry grounded him. Standard procedure. Fighter pilots need 2 hands for throttle and stick. For gun button and trim wheel. McClachlin refused to accept it. He designed a custom harness. It let him operate the throttle with his residual limb. He practiced until dogfighting became automatic. Until he could land and recover without thinking about the missing hand. The Air Ministry remained skeptical. They let him return to flying, but not to frontline squadrons. Not to critical theaters. Malta, early 1943. And that's where they sent him. Malta had endured 2 years of siege. More bombs per square mile than London. The harbors were twisted steel. The airfields were patched with coral dust and crushed stone. Malta got the Spitfire Mark Vs. The cast-offs. The aircraft everyone else had outgrown. Single-stage superchargers. Lower operational ceiling. Less speed than the Mark X's fighting over England and North Africa. A disabled pilot flying obsolete aircraft on an island whose strategic importance was fading. McClachlin didn't complain. He studied the Mark V, learned its limitations not as weaknesses but as parameters. It couldn't climb as fast as newer models, so he adjusted his tactics to favor speed over altitude. It couldn't turn as tightly at high speed, so he used gravity and dive angles to compensate. He flew the aircraft as it was, not as he wished it to be. His ground crew noticed how he tested the control surfaces before every flight, how he checked the gun harmonization himself, how he calculated fuel loads to the gallon, balancing range against weight. Other pilots saw the Mark V as a burden. McClachlin saw it as a problem with solutions. April 6, 1943. He's assigned a routine patrol. Standard circuit around the island. Eyes on the radar pickets in shipping lanes. Return before fuel drops below reserve. No heroics. He takes off at 8 a.m. The Spitfire climbs slowly in the dense morning air. The engine hums steady. The altimeter winds upward. 5,000 feet. 10,000. 15. He levels off at 18,000 feet, where the Mark V breathes easiest. The sky is empty, cloudless. The Mediterranean stretches in every direction. Then the radar station breaks silence. Multiple contacts. High altitude. Bearing north-northwest. Distance closing. McClachlin checks his fuel. 32 minutes remaining. He scans the sky. Nothing yet. The contacts resolve. First as dark specks. Then as distinct shapes. Messerschmitts. The BF-109G model. Fast. Aggressive. Built to outclimb interceptors and kill bombers. He counts them. 10, 15, 20, 22. No bombers. No ground targets. A pure fighter sweep. Hunting for a position. They're heading straight for Malta. Retention hook, number 1 to 215. McClachlin knew the standing orders. Avoid engagement. Preserve the aircraft. Let them pass. And he was about to ignore every single one. The decision is not bravado. It's calculation. If 22 German fighters reach Malta unopposed, they'll strafe the airfields, parked aircraft, supply dumps, radar stations. A single strafing run could destroy more fighters than a week of combat. McClachlin's mission isn't to win, it's to disrupt. Make the enemy react. Turn their offensive sweep into a defensive scramble. Buy time for ground defenses to prepare. He angles the Spitfire into the sun, gaining every advantage the Mark V can offer. Speed. Position. The element of shock. He closes the distance. Throttle wide open. Engine roaring at maximum continuous power. The German pilots see him, one Spitfire, alone. They break formation, turning to meet the threat. Standard response. Swarm the lone attacker. Overwhelm with numbers. Eliminate the nuisance. McClachlin opens fire at 400 yards. A long burst. Tracers arc through the air. The lead Messerschmitt breaks hard left. The formation scatters. Instinct takes over. The hunters become cautious. They don't know if he's the vanguard of a larger force. McClachlin climbs. The Mark V strains against gravity. Supercharger whining. The Messerschmitts climb faster. But McClachlin isn't trying to outclimb them. He's trying to keep them climbing, burning fuel, burning time. One BF-109 dives on him from above. McClachlin rolls inverted and pulls through. G-force is crushing him into the seat. The Messerschmitt overshoots. He reverses, lines up, fires again. Brief burst. The enemy fighter breaks away. Trailing smoke or vapor? Impossible to tell. Another attack from McClachlin turns into it, tightening the circle, forcing the German pilot to choose between collision and breaking off. The pilot breaks. McClachlin fires into the turn. Hits or misses, he doesn't know. No time to confirm. The radio erupts. The radar station, the airfield, demanding his status, asking if he needs support, telling him to disengage. He ignores the radio. His focus is absolute. Fuel gauge dropping. Ammunition counter winding down. 22 fighters circling, coordinating, adjusting tactics. If you want to see how McClachlin fought off 22 fighters with one arm and an outdated Spitfire, and how he survived what happened when his aircraft got shot to pieces, hit that like button right now. Every like helps us rescue these forgotten World War II stories from the archives. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible true stories. Now back to McClachlin's next move, but the Germans were adapting, and McClachlin's ammunition counter was dropping fast. McClachlin dives, the Mark V accelerates. Airspeed indicator climbing past 300 knots, 350. 400. The controls stiffen, wings shudder. He levels out low, skimming the wave tops, forcing the enemy to follow him down. At low altitude, the Bf-109's advantage disappears. The playing field flattens. McClachlin turns hard, wingtip nearly kissing the water. The Messerschmitts follow, but cautiously. At this altitude, one mistake is fatal. He leads them in a wide arc, away from Malta, away from the airfields. Every minute they chase him is a minute they're not bombing the island. The engagement stretches past 10 minutes. Then 15. The fuel gauge needle drops toward red. McClachlin calculates the distance back to Malta, the reserve required. The margin of error, 5 minutes of combat fuel remaining. Maybe less. The Messerschmitts are adapting. They're no longer chasing in a pack. They're setting up coordinated attacks, high and low. Slashing passes, trying to box him in, force a mistake. McClachlin uses the sun. He climbs back into it, throttle screaming. Engine temperature gauge edging toward yellow. The Bf-109s follow. But the glare blinds them for critical seconds. He turns inside their attacks, forcing them to overshoot, breaking their coordination. His ammunition is nearly gone. Short bursts now. 1 second, 2, just enough to make them react. To keep them defensive. To prevent them from ignoring him and pressing toward Malta. Remember, McClachlin only had 32 minutes of fuel when this started. He's been fighting for 16 minutes. And his tanks are running dry. One Messerschmitt closes from behind. McClachlin sees the muzzle flashes. Hears the thud of impacts. Cannon shells punch through the Spitfire's tail section. The aircraft shudders. The rudder responds sluggishly. He kicks the pedals, compensating with aileron. Keeping the nose steady, he reverses hard, pulling the Spitfire through a vertical climb and roll that bleeds speed but changes his angle. The Messerschmitt can't follow the maneuver at this airspeed. It stalls, flicks into a spin. McClachlin doesn't wait to see the recovery. He dives again, heading east, toward home. At this point, McClachlin had kept 22 fighters busy for 15 minutes. But what happened next would test every skill he'd learned. Stay with me because this gets intense. The Bf-109s pursue. But their fuel is also low. They've been burning maximum power for 20 minutes. Their endurance is limited. One by one, they peel off, heading back to Sicily. The attack is over. McClachlin levels off at 3,000 feet. The engine coughs once, twice. The fuel gauge reads empty. He switches to the reserve tank. The engine catches, smooths out. 5 minutes of fuel, maybe less. The limestone cliffs of Malta appear ahead. The airfield, the runway. He lowers the landing gear. The hydraulics groan. One wheel locks. The other doesn't. He cycles the system. Both wheels lock. The flaps extend, but the rudder is shot. 17 cannon shell impacts. Torn fabric. Punctured fuel tanks. Bent control surfaces. The aircraft yaws left and right. Fighting him, he compensates with his one arm. Aileron pressure. Throttle adjustment. Every input precise. Calculated. The approach is ragged. The Spitfire wallowing through the air like a wounded bird. He's too high. Too fast. He slips the aircraft. Crossing the controls. Bleeding altitude without gaining speed. The runway threshold passes beneath. Retention hook number 4 to 730. Remember, McClachlin only had one arm, and he was about to land a shot-up Spitfire with barely any rudder control. The wheels touch, hard. Tires screeching, tail wheel bouncing. The aircraft slews left. He fights it, right aileron. Opposite brake pressure with his good hand. The Spitfire holds the central line. Barely. He brakes harder. The engine coughs, dies. The propeller windmills to a stop. The Spitfire rolls to a halt at the far end of the runway. Silence. Just the ticking of hot metal. The whistle of wind through bullet holes. Ground crew sprint toward the aircraft. They count the damage. 17 cannon shell impacts. Torn fabric. Punctured fuel tanks. Bent control surfaces. The aircraft is barely airworthy. McClachlin climbs out. His flight suit is soaked with sweat. His left arm aches where the harness rubbed against the prosthetic. He says nothing. Just walks toward the debriefing hut. Logbook tucked under his right arm. The intelligence officer asks how many he shot down. McClachlin shrugs. One confirmed. Maybe two? I don't know. That wasn't the mission. The officer leans forward. Why did you engage? You were ordered to avoid contact. McClachlin's answer is simple. They were heading for the airfield. Someone had to turn them around. The combat report circulates through RAF command. One Spitfire Mark V engaging 22 enemy fighters for 17 minutes. No losses on the British side. German sweep aborted. Airfield untouched. Analysts study the report. They note the tactics, the use of altitude and sun position, the refusal to fight the enemy's fight, the focus on disruption rather than destruction. It contradicts prevailing doctrine. Doctrine emphasizes avoiding unfavorable engagements. But the results are undeniable. McClachlin didn't win by defeating 22 fighters. He won by preventing them from completing their mission. The objective wasn't aerial victory. It was strategic denial. Other pilots began to reconsider the Mark V, not as an obsolete aircraft, but as a different kind of weapon. It can't dominate at high altitude. Can't outrun the latest German fighters in level flight. But in the hands of a pilot who understands its strengths, it can still change outcomes. The ground crews repair McClachlin's Spitfire. Takes 2 days. They patch the holes. Replace the damaged control surfaces. Test the engine. The aircraft returns to service. So does McClachlin. He flies 36 more combat missions over the next 3 months. Not all are dramatic. Most are routine patrols. Convoy escorts. Reconnaissance. The unglamorous work of maintaining air superiority. But his example spreads. Pilots stop seeing the Mark V as a limitation. They start seeing it as a tool that requires different thinking. Tactics evolve. Formations adapt. The obsolete fighter becomes a flexible platform. Effective not because it matches the enemy as performance, but because it as flown by people who refuse to be limited by specifications. Malta's air defenses hold. The island never falls. Convoys resume. Supply lines stabilize. The Axis forces in North Africa, denied resupply, collapse. By May 1943, the Mediterranean opens. The path to Italy clears. McClachlin's single engagement on April 6th is not the reason for this success, but it is a thread in the fabric. One decision, one pilot, one obsolete aircraft. Proving that numbers on a data sheet don't determine outcomes. People do. July 1943. A routine ferry flight. Engine failure over the Irish Sea. McClachlin attempts a forced landing. The aircraft crashes. He is 24 years old. 3 months after his greatest victory. 3 months after proving that courage and logic could beat superior technology. The official records list him as a casualty of mechanical failure. The obituaries note his bravery, his determination to continue flying despite his injury, but they missed the deeper lesson. McClachlin didn't succeed because he was fearless. He succeeded because he was logical. He saw the Spitfire Mark V not as a symbol or disappointment, but as a machine with measurable capabilities. He saw the enemy formation not as an overwhelming threat, but as a problem with variables, speed, altitude, time, fuel, psychology. He understood that. Victory isn't always about superiority. Sometimes it's about asymmetry, about using what you have in ways the enemy doesn't expect, about turning limitations into tactics. The Mark V continued to serve throughout the war, in theaters where high-altitude performance mattered less, in ground attack roles, in training units that taught new pilots the fundamentals. The aircraft retired quietly, without fanfare. Its contributions measured not in headlines, but in missions flown. Pilots trained. Enemies deterred. Decades later, Aviation historians revisit McClachlin's combat reports. They analyze the engagement through modern lenses. Game theory. Decision science? They conclude his tactics were optimal given the constraints. That his choice to engage was rational. That his survival was not luck, but skill. But the numbers missed the human element. The moment when a pilot with one arm and an outdated aircraft decided that the mission mattered more than the odds. The moment when logic and courage converged. The moment when the possible expanded because someone refused to accept the limits others had drawn. War is often remembered through its technologies. The aircraft that dominated the skies. The innovations that shifted the balance. But technology is inert. It requires human judgment to become effective, human courage to become decisive, human ingenuity to transcend its specifications. McClachlin's legacy isn't the Spitfire Mark V. It's the reminder that obsolescence is a judgment, not a fact. That the best weapon is the one you understand completely. That heroism isn't about invincibility. It's about knowing what must be done and doing it anyway. If this story moved you, do me a favor right now, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to push this story to more people who need to hear it. Hit subscribe and turn on that bell so you never miss when we drop these World War II stories. We're pulling these from military archives and forgotten combat reports every single week. Now drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada. Our community spans the entire globe. You're not just watching history, you're keeping it alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if you have family who served in World War II. Just let us know you're here. James McClachlin never sought fame, never gave interviews, never wrote memoirs. The only records that exist are buried in RAF archives and fading combat reports. Without videos like this, his story disappears completely. That's why this channel exists. To make sure pilots like McClachlin don't vanish into silence. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these stories. Thank you for making sure James McClachlin doesn't disappear. These pilots deserve to be remembered. You're helping make that happen. I'll see you in the next one.